Okay, in this section, this lecture, we'll be talking specifically about the United States and discussing our system of politics and government. Once again, this is a very, very, very large and broad topic, so we're just going to be touching on some basic notions here, kind of a simplified, oversimplified view of some of these topics. Typically within, when we talk about U.S., and we discussed already that U.S. is an example of a representative democracy. So then we talk about the influence of political parties. And when we talk about political parties in the U.S., we generally refer to two major political parties, the Democrats and Republicans. The Democratic Party largely associated more with working class people, support more even distribution of wealth typically across society, especially in regard to, like I said, the lower classes, social welfare systems, a lot of times a lot of concern on issues such as wages, working conditions within society, whereas we kind of, again, typify the Republican Party as having more to do with the upper wealthy classes, definitely more of a support for the ideas of accumulation of wealth and concerned largely the protection of rights of corporations and businesses. Again, those are very, very, very broad overviews, and it's not to say that those are complete descriptive political party platforms. One of the things we can say in general, again, this is a large topic of discussion in Sociology 202, social problems is, and this will also come up a little bit later in this module when we discuss economic systems, that one of the characteristics and sometimes the criticism of the two major parties is that they actually, when we look at the broad political spectrum, actually have much more in common with one another than they do differences, although it seems, especially in the media and the social construction of our political system, we definitely think of Democrats and Republicans as being, in some ways, we think about them as being polar opposites. When we look at the broader political spectrum, that both parties are, for the most part, very pro-capitalist in their stances, and the differences between them are smaller than, like I said, the grand scale of things. So again, it's sometimes difficult to make what we sometimes call centrist definitions of people who kind of fall in between that spectrum, difficult to recognize. So in other words, when we typically think of Democrats, we think liberal. When we think of Republicans, we think conservative. And we tend not to recognize that there may be a large group of people who might be described as liberal Republicans or conservative Democrats. But we still try in a lot of ways to keep these distinctions very separate and not recognize kind of a center between these two parties, which for the most part actually have very much more in common with one another than they do differences. And again, then we can discuss the recognition or lack thereof of what we sometimes refer to collectively as third parties, but any party which is not Democrat or Republican has historically had a very difficult time gaining recognition within our political party. When we talk about voting patterns, and again, because our society is democratic, representative democracy, we then want to take a look at the ways that people participate in this representative democracy. When we look at, again, research has told us and indicated who is most likely to vote in our society. We definitely know that as people age in our society, they're more likely to vote. Ethnically, we know that whites are more likely to vote in our society. People who are college graduates, people who have jobs, people who have a higher income, and gender-wise, we know that females are more likely to vote in our society than males. Conversely, when we look at the people who are least likely to vote in some of those characteristics, typical, again, people who are earlier in life or younger people in our society, people who are members of ethnic or racial minority groups, those people who are less educated, people who are unemployed, and generally the lower classes or poor people are less likely to vote in our society. So when we look at those kind of overall characteristics of people and look at how those characteristics make people in our society or indicate that they're more or less likely to vote, what we can typically see is those people who are feel like they're benefiting more from society are also the people who are more likely then to participate in our representative democracy. And those people who feel less invested in society are those people who are less likely to vote. And then that is sometimes termed voter apathy. So when we talk about apathy, we're talking about non-participation. So when we wonder then, or try to investigate why voter apathy exists or lack of participation in representative democracy, two overwhelming explanations can be given. One is alienation. We discussed that earlier when we talked about Marx and the idea of kind of a lack of connection to society. So when people feel like outsiders to society, when they feel like society is not benefiting them or that they are actively participating in society, then they are less likely to participate in representative democracy and less likely to vote. And then just the word apathy itself, we can wonder why people make a conscious decision not to vote, and many times what the explanation given is that greater numbers of people in our society have lost faith in their ability to participate in democracy as a way of changing society. So in other words, one of the more common explanations for voter empathy is my vote doesn't count, or what's the use? So when we look at those characteristics, we can clearly see again, broad generalizations we can make among voting patterns in our society. One of the other things we can definitely look at, some characteristics that are maybe not unique, but certainly stand out in looking at U.S. politics, is the existence of a special interest group and lobbyists. Special interest groups are groups of people, generally organizations, that share interest or opinion on a particular topic and then seek to exert some type of political power or pressure in order to advance that agenda. So again, examples would be social characteristics like age. So the AARP, the American Association for Retired People. Economic, so a particular industry might have special lobby groups, coal, steel, technology, those kind of things. And the idea that a special interest group then has an agenda that they want to forward. So they're going to exert some type of influence or power in the political system to get laws that are favorable to them passed, or to have laws that they require, that they consider unfavorable, removed, repealed, changed, those kind of things. Into that come lobbyists. Lobbyists are individuals who are employed by special interest groups to act on their behalf in the political process. Many cases these are retired or in some cases defeated politicians. So in other words, people who have lost their seats in power or voluntarily left them, who then can still use the contacts that they have within government on behalf of the special interest groups. And then, so that starts off on what we generally call a small scale. When we talk about political interest groups operating on a much larger scale, that's when we start to talk about what we call PACs, PACs, or political action committees. These are groups which generally then approach large numbers of people in society for donations toward a specific cause or group, and then those are pooled together to form very large again, pools of money or political power that can be used to influence politics, which of course then when we talk about these ideas, and then PACs even leads to the idea of super PACs, which are even larger, and in a representative democracy. Of course, the criticism is this appears to, again, sidestep or supersede the idea of representative democracy, where individuals are exerting through their representatives political power, and that these special interest groups, lobbyists, PACs, and even to a certain and larger super PACs are actually appear in some cases to be exerting more political influence and power, in a sense buying votes and running, quote unquote, running the government, which then leads us to a philosophical or perspective debate about the idea of who then actually rules the United States. And we can come at this from a functionalist point of view and a conflict theory point of view. Functionalists point to the idea of pluralism, that the state, or the society as a whole, but its government was created to provide for the basic needs of all those people living in society. So again, that idea of citizenship, and that people allow the government to exercise authority, and in a lot of cases allow the government to exercise violence for the greater good of all the people in the society. But then functionalists also point to the idea that society, especially representative democracy, is a balanced system that protects not only citizens from each other, but also protects us from the state itself. And this idea of pluralism is that there are so many different groups in society, each with their own agendas, each with their own ideologies and values that in some ways complement each other and in some ways oppose each other, but that they all act together and prevent any one group from becoming so strong that it could actually, quote unquote, kind of seize control or take over a society. So we often hear this when we talk about the government. We talk about the three branches of government and checks and balances. All those things are in place to keep any one group or organization from becoming so powerful in society so as to be, again, move the society toward totalitarianism or a dictatorship. So no one group dominates the society, and all groups, to a sense, have to work together to pursue their interests. So it encourages negotiation and compromise among these groups. Would be the functional view. Clearly, the conflict theory group is going to be much different than, or the conflict theory perspective is going to take a much different look at this. And when we talked in Module 1, we talked about some very important sociologists, and one of the people we mentioned was a gentleman by the name of C. Wright Mills, who in the 50s discussed the emergence, at the time he predicted the emergence of a group of people he called the power elite, and then that was followed up by studies after him that have more or less looked at and kind of confirmed the existence of a power elite in society. The idea that there are people in society with so much power that they actually in some ways supersede the government and control decisions which impact the lives of most individuals, but that individuals have very little say or representation in those decisions that are made. We sometimes look at this today, and we look at corporate culture and the idea that corporate leaders are very, very powerful people and probably fit this mold of the power elite that we sometimes talk about, the quote-unquote 1% in society. People that we say, to a large degree, wield more power than even most representatives of the federal government do. And that these people are the people at the very top of society are the ones that exert the most amount of influence on most of our social institutions. So law, the economy, medicine, education, a lot of the decisions that impact all the people in those social institutions, and by that we mean almost everybody in society, are being influenced by this very small group of people at the very top of society who with an incredible amount of power. And again, sometimes it sounds like conspiracy theory, and for those people then, who want to argue against this will sometimes point to or sometimes ridicule the existence of, quote unquote fake groups like the Illuminati or some kind of secret organization. And actually, most conflict theorists who discuss this idea of the power elite don't represent the power elite as a singular group of people who, let's say, get together in secret or even unpurposefully. They just happen to be the people at the top of society who act in their best interests, and it would so happen to be that all those people in that very small group at the top of society have common interests, so their decisions are very likely to be the same based on their very similar backgrounds and goals. So it's not necessarily a kind of a homogeneous group which acts consciously with each other to pursue these goals, but much more likely just a very similar group of people who make very similar decisions.